morning sun painted golden streaks across the kitchen table as Thomas Webb packed apple slices and peanut butter sandwiches into a small unicorn lunchbox. His daughter Zoe sat at the table swinging her legs and humming a tune she'd learned in kindergarten last week. "Can we go on the big slide today, Daddy?" Zoe asked, her eyes wide with excitement. At 6 years old, she was fearless on playground equipment that made Thomas's heart skip when she climbed too high. "Of course, sunshine," Thomas replied, zipping up the lunchbox. "But remember our deal. I hold your hand on the stairs going up." Zoe rolled her eyes dramatically in the way only a 6-year-old could perfect. "Dad. I'm not a baby anymore." Thomas laughed and ruffled her curly hair, which caught the sunlight in shades of honey brown, so much like her mother's. The thought brought a familiar pang. It had been almost 2 years since Allison had passed away after her battle with cancer, but certain moments still hit him unexpectedly. Zoe had her mother's hair and smile, though her skin tone was several shades lighter than Thomas's deep brown complexion. "Not a baby, but still my little girl," he said, grabbing their backpack filled with sunscreen, water bottles, and a first aid kit, a habit from his engineer's mind that always prepared for every possibility. They had moved to Oakwood Heights just 3 months ago. The suburban neighborhood offered better schools for Zoe and was closer to Thomas's new job at a tech company that had finally offered the work-life balance he needed as a single parent. The move had been tough on both of them, leaving behind their support network and the home where memories of Allison lived in every corner. But they were slowly building a new life here day by day. The community park was just a 10-minute walk from their house, one of the selling points that had convinced Thomas to choose this neighborhood. Hand in hand, they strolled down tree-lined streets where spring flowers were beginning to bloom in carefully tended gardens. "Look, Daddy, I can hop all the way to the corner," Zoe demonstrated, bouncing on one foot until she wobbled and grabbed Thomas's hand for support. "Very impressive," he said with genuine admiration. "You've been practicing." They passed neighbors walking dogs who nodded politely, though few stopped to chat. Thomas had noticed this pattern, friendly waves from a distance but hesitation to engage further. He tried not to read too much into it. Being new in any neighborhood took time. Westside Park sprawled across 5 acres with modern playground equipment, tennis courts, and a small duck pond. Saturday morning meant the place was alive with families. Children darted between swing sets and climbing structures while parents clustered on benches, alternating between watching their kids and scrolling through phones. "There's Jade from my class." Zoe tugged on his hand, pointing toward a girl on the monkey bars. "Can I go play with her?" "Sure, but stay where I can see you," Thomas said, finding an empty bench with a good view of the playground. He settled down and pulled out his phone to check work emails, a habit he was trying to break on weekends. But the startup's latest project had hit some snags that kept him on edge. Across the playground, near a row of picnic tables, Bethany Richards sipped her latte and frowned. She'd been coming to this park every Saturday for years and prided herself on knowing most of the regular families. The man sitting alone on the bench was unfamiliar, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a faded navy baseball cap and gray t-shirt. More concerning to Bethany was that he seemed to be watching the children a bit too intently. She nudged her friend Charlotte. "Have you seen that man before?" she asked, tilting her head slightly in Thomas's direction. Charlotte glanced over. "Don't think so. Must be new." "He's been watching the kids for 20 minutes, Bethany said, checking her watch for emphasis, though she'd only noticed him moments ago. "Probably just a dad," Charlotte replied with a shrug, turning back to their conversation about the upcoming neighborhood association meeting. But Bethany couldn't shake her unease. When she saw a light-skinned little girl run up to the man calling him Daddy and ask for a juice box from his backpack, her suspicion only deepened. The child looked nothing like him. Bethany watched as he tenderly wiped dirt from the girl's cheek and helped her open the juice box. "That can't be his daughter," she murmured, more to herself than to Charlotte. "Why not?" Charlotte asked, following her gaze. "Just look at them," Bethany said, as if the answer was obvious. Thomas, unaware of the scrutiny, was helping Zoe with her juice when his phone rang. It was work. The server migration he'd been worried about had hit a problem. He answered, speaking in the technical shorthand he used with his team while keeping one eye on Zoe as she skipped back to the slide. "No. Tell them we can't restart the system during peak hours," he said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used as team lead. We'll have to wait until tonight." To Bethany, his demeanor suddenly seemed suspicious. A man speaking tersely on the phone while watching children. She stood up, smoothing down her crisp khaki pants. "I think I should talk to Officer Reynolds," she said. The community police officer often parked his patrol car near the park entrance on weekends, part of the neighborhood's visible policing initiative that Bethany had championed at council meetings. "Aren't you overreacting a bit?" Charlotte asked, but Bethany was already walking away, purpose in every step. Thomas ended his call and slipped his phone into his pocket. Annoyed that work had intruded on his time with Zoe, he watched her go down the slide for what must have been the 20th time, her delighted squeals carrying across the playground. "Again, Daddy. Watch me go down backwards this time," she called. "Be careful, sunshine," he responded, then added, "2 more times and then we'll have lunch, okay?" The park had grown busier as the morning stretched toward noon. A group of boys had started a soccer game on the grassy area beside the playground, and the noise level had risen considerably. Thomas noticed a woman in a park ranger uniform talking to several mothers, pointing in his direction occasionally. An uneasy feeling settled in his stomach, a familiar sensation he'd experienced too many times before. Officer David Reynolds had been with the Oakwood Heights Police Department for 15 years. At 52, he preferred these community patrols to the higher stress calls he'd handled in his younger days. Most weekends at Westside Park involved nothing more serious than lost children or minor first aid for scraped knees. "Officer Reynolds, I need to speak with you," Bethany said, approaching his patrol car parked under a maple tree. "There's a situation that requires your attention." Reynolds had known Bethany for years. She was the neighborhood watch coordinator and never missed a community safety meeting. She could be overzealous at times, but he'd learned it was easier to listen to her concerns than dismiss them. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Richards?" he asked, stepping out of his vehicle. "There's a man at the playground," she said, lowering her voice. "He's been watching the children and acting suspiciously. Now he's trying to leave with a little girl who looks nothing like him. I think we might have a potential abduction situation." Reynolds frowned. "Did you see him harm the child?"
"No, but she doesn't look like his daughter at all," Bethany insisted.
She called him Daddy, but there's simply no way. And he was on the phone speaking very aggressively about systems and doing something tonight. The whole thing feels wrong. Officer Reynolds glanced toward the playground. The description matched a man now packing up a backpack while a young girl in a purple shirt hung upside down from the monkey bars nearby. "I'll speak with him," Reynolds said, partly to appease Bethany and partly because it was his job to follow up on concerns, however unlikely they seemed. "Please don't approach them yourself." Thomas had just called Zoe over for lunch when he noticed the police officer walking toward them. The officer's hand wasn't on his weapon, but his purposeful stride made Thomas's heart beat faster. "Zoe, come here, sweetheart," he said, keeping his voice calm and even. Zoe sensed the change in her father's demeanor and hurried to his side. "What's wrong, Daddy?" "Nothing, sunshine. We're just going to talk to this police officer for a minute." Officer Reynolds approached with a practiced neutral expression. "Good afternoon, sir. Enjoying the park today?" "Yes, we were just about to have lunch," Thomas replied, instinctively placing a protective hand on Zoe's shoulder. He'd been in situations like this before. Questioned in upscale neighborhoods, stopped in department stores, followed by security in malls. He knew the drill. Remain calm, speak clearly, be polite but firm. "Could I have a quick word with you?" the officer asked, gesturing a few feet away. Thomas hesitated, glancing down at Zoe, who was looking confused and increasingly worried. "We can talk right here. This is my daughter." Behind Officer Reynolds, Thomas could see the woman who had been watching them. She stood with arms crossed, a look of certainty on her face that made his stomach tighten with anger and resignation. Not again. Not in front of Zoe. The air seemed to thicken around them as Officer Reynolds stood before Thomas and Zoe. Thomas felt his daughter press against his leg, her small hand clutching the fabric of his jeans. In these moments, he wished he could shield her from the reality that was unfolding. A reality he had hoped she wouldn't have to face until she was older. "Sir, I've received a concern from another park visitor," Officer Reynolds began, his tone professional but cautious. "Would you mind showing me some identification?" Thomas kept his voice steady, aware that his response now would shape how this encounter played out. May I ask what concern was raised, officer? Reynolds glanced briefly at Zoe, who was watching with wide, confused eyes. Perhaps we could speak a few steps away? With all respect, I'd prefer to stay right here with my daughter. Whatever questions you have, you can ask in front of her. Thomas knew from experience that separating would only frighten Zoe more. The officer shifted his weight, clearly weighing his approach. All right. A park visitor expressed concern about your relationship to this child. A cold wave of understanding washed over Thomas. So that was it. The same old story, just a different setting. He took a deep breath. This is my daughter, Zoe Webb. I'm Thomas Webb, her father. He emphasized each word clearly, fighting to keep the weariness from his voice. I have ID, and her birth certificate is accessible on my phone. I keep a digital copy after the last time this happened. Zoe looked up at him. What's happening, Daddy? Did I do something wrong? No, sunshine. Nothing's wrong. The officer is just doing his job. Thomas squeezed her shoulder gently. Officer Reynolds watched this interaction, noting the natural way the child leaned into her father, the obvious comfort and familiarity between them. 20 years on the force had given him a good sense about these situations, and his initial doubts were already fading. Still, he needed to follow procedure. If you could show me that ID, sir, I'd appreciate it. As Thomas reached for his wallet, Bethany Richards approached, unable to contain herself any longer. She had been watching from what she considered a safe distance, but grew impatient with what she perceived as the officer's overly casual approach. Officer Reynolds, I really think you should separate them while questioning him, she said loudly. Several nearby parents turned to look at the unfolding scene. That girl doesn't look anything like him. Zoe's grip on Thomas's leg tightened. Daddy? Her voice wavered. Thomas felt a surge of anger but forced himself to remain outwardly calm. Getting visibly upset would only escalate the situation, something he'd learned through painful experience. He handed his driver's license to Officer Reynolds. This is exactly why I keep her birth certificate on my phone, he said, his voice tight as he pulled up the document. My late wife was white. Zoe takes after her in some ways, after me in others, like many children do with their parents. Bethany crossed her arms. I'm just trying to protect the children in our community. You're not from around here. We moved to Oakwood Heights 3 months ago, Thomas replied evenly. Zoe attends first grade at Oakwood Elementary. Her teacher is Mrs. Chen. We live on Maple Street. Officer Reynolds examined the documentation, comparing the birth certificate to both Thomas's ID and to Zoe. The birth certificate clearly listed Thomas Webb as the father. And your mother's name is? Reynolds asked Zoe gently. Allison Webb, Zoe answered promptly. She's in heaven now. She had cancer. She said this with the direct simplicity of a child who had been given honest answers about a difficult subject. Thomas pulled up a family photo on his phone. Him, Zoe, and Allison at the beach last summer before Allison's health had deteriorated rapidly. This was taken about 2 years ago. More park visitors had begun to gather at a slight distance, some pretending not to watch while others openly stared. Among them was Charlotte, Bethany's friend, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable with the scene her friend had created. What's going on here? A woman approached with purpose in her stride. Thomas recognized her as the mother of Jade, Zoe's classmate. Mrs. Lewis, Zoe said, her face brightening slightly at the sight of someone familiar. Hello? Zoe, Mrs. Lewis replied warmly before turning to Officer Reynolds. Is there a problem, officer? This is Mr. Webb, Zoe's father. They came to Jade's birthday party last month. Officer Reynolds nodded, handing Thomas back his identification. Just responding to a concern, ma'am. Everything appears to be in order. He turned to Thomas. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Webb. Before Thomas could respond, Bethany stepped forward again. You can't be serious. Anyone could fake documents these days. And just because someone else recognizes them doesn't mean... Ma'am, Officer Reynolds cut her off firmly. I've verified their identities and relationship. This matter is closed. A small crowd had now gathered around them. Thomas could feel their stares like physical pressure. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, a few even hostile. But worst of all was the confusion and hurt on Zoe's face as she tried to understand why a stranger was insisting she couldn't be her father's daughter. Can we go home now, Daddy? Zoe asked in a small voice. Of course, sunshine, Thomas replied, packing up their lunch which now lay forgotten on the bench. He turned to Officer Reynolds. "Are we free to leave, officer?" "Yes, sir." "Again, I apologize for the disturbance." As they prepared to leave, a young man approached Thomas. He'd been recording the interaction on his phone from a distance. "Hey, I got all that on video," he said quietly. "That wasn't right. What happened to you?" "If you want the footage, I can send it to you." Thomas paused, considering. Part of him wanted to just take Zoe home and try to salvage what remained of their Saturday. But another part knew that these incidents didn't just disappear, they lingered, affecting both him and potentially Zoe for days, weeks, sometimes longer. "Thank you," he said finally, exchanging contact information with the young man, whose name was Devin. As they walked away, Zoe tugged on Thomas's hand. "Daddy, why did that lady say I'm not your daughter?" The question pierced Thomas's heart. He knelt down to Zoe's level, away from the watching eyes of the dispersing crowd. "Some people don't understand that families can look different from each other," he explained gently. "Your skin is a bit lighter than mine because you got some of Mommy's coloring and some of mine. But that doesn't change that you're my daughter and I'm your daddy." Zoe considered this, her small forehead wrinkling in thought. "That's silly. Joey in my class has 2 mommies, and Lily was adopted from China, and her parents aren't Chinese at all." Thomas smiled, touched by his daughter's simple wisdom. "You're right, it is silly. People come in all sorts of families." They walked in silence for a few moments, leaving the park behind. Thomas thought the conversation had ended, but then Zoe spoke again. "That lady made you sad," she observed. "I could tell because you got really quiet and your eyes looked different." Thomas was stunned by her perception. "Yes, it did make me sad. And a little angry, too. When Timmy at school made fun of my curly hair and said it looked like a poodle. Mrs. Chen said sometimes people say hurtful things because they don't know better. Not because they're bad people." Thomas squeezed her hand, amazed at his daughter's capacity for understanding. "Mrs. Chen is very wise. But it's also okay to feel upset when people say or do hurtful things." By the time they reached their house, Thomas's phone was buzzing with notifications. Devin had sent the video, which was already being shared in local social media groups. The comments were divided, some expressing outrage at Bethany's behavior, others defending her caution about children's safety. Thomas set his phone aside, not ready to deal with that yet. Instead, he focused on making the rest of the day normal for Zoe. They baked cookies, watched her favorite cartoon, and played board games. But as evening fell and Zoe went to bed, Thomas sat alone at the kitchen table, replaying the day's events. The move to Oakwood Heights was supposed to be a fresh start after losing Allison. A place where Zoe could grow up with good schools and safe neighborhoods. Now he wondered if they would ever truly be accepted here. His phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar local number. For a moment he considered not answering, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Webb, this is Principal Winters from Oakwood Elementary." Thomas straightened, immediately concerned about school on Monday. "Yes, hello. I've been made aware of the incident at the park today," the principal said, her tone serious but warm. "I wanted to personally call and say that what happened was unacceptable. Oakwood Elementary stands for inclusivity and respect for all our families." Thomas felt a tightness in his chest ease slightly. "Thank you for saying that. More than saying it, we want to show it. Our PTA president has reached out as well. The community is organizing a response, and we'd like your input, if you're comfortable providing it." As Principal Winters explained further, Thomas felt something unexpected begin to grow amidst the hurt and anger, a cautious hope. Perhaps this incident, painful as it was, could lead to something meaningful, not just for him and Zoe, but for other families as well. After hanging up, he walked quietly to Zoe's room and stood in the doorway, watching her sleep peacefully, her curls spread across the pillow, her small chest rising and falling with each breath. In that moment, he made a decision. They wouldn't leave Oakwood Heights. They would stay and face whatever came next, together. Sunday morning brought a strange mix of sunshine and tension to the Webb household. Thomas sat at the kit. Chen Island, scrolling through his phone with a frown etched across his forehead. The video of yesterday's confrontation had spread far beyond the local community groups. It now had thousands of views and shares across multiple platforms. Local news websites had picked up the story, with headlines ranging from sympathetic to sensationalist. "Is your tummy hurting?" Zoe asked, padding into the kitchen in her unicorn pajamas, hair tousled from sleep. "You're making the same face as when you ate that spicy burrito." Thomas quickly set his phone down and managed to smile. No, sunshine, just grown-up stuff. He opened his arms and she climbed onto his lap for a morning hug. How about pancakes for breakfast? As Thomas mixed batter and heated the griddle, his phone continued to buzz with notifications. He'd already received dozens of messages from friends and colleagues who had seen the video, expressions of support, outrage, and concern. Even his mother had called from Philadelphia, ready to drive up that very day until Thomas assured her they were okay. The pancakes were just about ready when a knock came at the front door. Thomas tensed, instinctively pulling Zoe closer to his side. "Who's that, Daddy?" Zoe asked. "I'm not sure, sunshine." "Let's go see." Thomas approached the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. Outside stood a woman he recognized as the PTA president, Jennifer Choi, along with two other parents he'd seen at school pickup. His first instinct was not to answer, to protect the Sunday morning peace he was trying to maintain for Zoe, but something in their posture, the way they stood respectfully back from the door rather than crowding, it made him reconsider. He opened the door partway, keeping Zoe behind him. "Mr. Webb," Jennifer began, her expression sincere. "I'm Jennifer Choi, the PTA president at Oakwood Elementary. This is Gabriela Mendez and Ravi Patel, also on the PTA board. We're sorry to disturb you on a Sunday, but we wanted to come in person rather than just call. What can I do for you?" Thomas asked, his tone neutral. Jennifer exchanged glances with her companions before continuing. "Actually, we're here to ask what we can do for you. What happened yesterday at the park was completely unacceptable. We want you and Zoe to know that the actions of one person don't represent our community." Zoe peeked around Thomas's leg, curious now. "Hi, Mrs. Choi. You came to our class for career day and showed us architect drawings." Jennifer smiled warmly at Zoe. "That's right. I remember you asked a very good question about why buildings don't fall down in the wind." Thomas felt some of his guardedness slip away. He opened the door wider. "Would you like to come in? I just made pancakes, probably more than Zoe and I can eat." 20 minutes later, they were all seated around the kitchen table, the adults with coffee and Zoe proudly distributing slightly misshapen pancakes she had helped flip. "The school board and PTA are united on this," Jennifer explained. "What happened to you wasn't just a personal slight. It revealed something in our community that needs addressing." Ravi nodded in agreement. "My wife and I moved here 5 years ago. We've experienced similar assumptions." He glanced meaningfully at his brown skin, usually more subtle, but the same issue. Gabriella leaned forward. "We're organizing a community response. Not just a statement, but action. Principal Winners is already planning diversity workshops for parents, but we want to do something more immediate and visible." "Like what?" Thomas asked, finding himself both cautious and curious. "Like a family diversity day at the park," Jennifer replied. "Next Saturday. A show of support and unity, but also a chance for education and connection. We're hoping you'll help us plan it." Thomas's first instinct was to decline. He didn't want to become the face of a cause or expose Zoe to more public attention, but looking at his daughter happily pouring too much syrup on her pancakes, he realized this might be an opportunity to help shape the world she would grow up in. "I need to think about it," he said honestly. "My priority has to be Zoe's well-being." "Of course," Jennifer assured him. "Take all the time you need. And please know, participation or not, our support is unconditional." After they left, Thomas cleaned up the kitchen while Zoe drew pictures at the table, humming to herself. His phone rang, a call from work. His team needed guidance on the server migration that had been interrupted yesterday. He was explaining the solution when another call came through, this one from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored it, but seconds later the same number called again. "I'm sorry, I need to take this other call," he told his colleague. "I'll email you the deployment steps in a few minutes." He switched to the unknown caller. "Hello, Thomas Webb speaking. Mr. Webb. This is Leslie Morgan from Channel 7 News. We've seen the video of the incident at Westside Park yesterday, and we'd like to interview you for our evening broadcast." Thomas froze. A local news station wanted to put him on TV. "I'm not interested in an interview," he said firmly. "Mr. Webb, this is an important story about racial profiling. Your perspective could help." "My perspective is that I want privacy for my family," Thomas interrupted. "Please don't call again." He hung up only for another unknown number to call immediately. This time it was a reporter from the city newspaper. After the third media call, Thomas turned his phone to silent, feeling a knot form in his stomach. What had been a painful but private incident was rapidly becoming a public spectacle. "Daddy, someone's at the door again," Zoe called from the living room. Thomas hurried in to find Zoe peering out the window. Outside, a news van had parked across the street, and a woman with a microphone stood on their front walkway. "Go to your room, sweetie," Thomas said gently but firmly. "I need to handle this." After making sure Zoe was safely upstairs, Thomas stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "You're on private property," he told the reporter. "Please leave." "Mr. Webb, we just want to hear your side of the story," the reporter persisted. "How do you feel about—" "How I feel is that my 6-year-old daughter deserves privacy and peace in her own home," Thomas said, struggling to keep his voice level. "This isn't a story for you, it's our life. Please respect that and leave." The reporter looked ready to press further, but something in Thomas's expression made her hesitate. "If you change your mind." She handed him a business card before reluctantly returning to the van. Thomas watched them drive away, then quickly went back inside and called his neighbor, an elderly gentleman named Frank who had helped them move in. "Frank, I hate to ask, but would it be all right if Zoe and I come over for a few hours? We're having a situation with reporters." "Say no more," Frank replied immediately. "Come through the back gate. Dorothy's making lunch anyway, and she always cooks for an army." Thomas thanked him and went upstairs to find Zoe. She was sitting on her bed, looking at a photo album. The page showed a picture of Thomas and Allison on their wedding day, both beaming at the camera. "Mommy was so pretty," Zoe said softly. "You look happy." Thomas sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her small shoulders. "We were very happy. And you know what made us happiest of all? When you were born." Zoe looked up at him with serious eyes. "That lady at the park didn't think I'm really your daughter because my skin isn't as dark as yours." Thomas's heart ached at her directness. "Yes, that's part of it, but that's silly. My friend Tyler has freckles even though his parents don't, and Layla has super curly hair but her mom's hair is straight." "You're absolutely right," Thomas said, amazed once again by his daughter's wisdom. "People don't always look exactly like their parents, and families come in all different combinations." "So that lady was just being ignorant," Zoe declared, using a word she'd recently learned. "Mrs. Chen says when people are ignorant, we should educate them, not get mad at them." Thomas hugged her tightly, blinking back unexpected tears. "Mrs. Chen is a very wise teacher. Now, how would you like to visit Mr. Frank and Mrs. Dorothy? I hear she's making lunch and you know how good her cookies are." As they slipped through the back gate into Frank and Dorothy's yard, Thomas felt a moment of peace amidst the chaos. Here, Zoe could just be a child enjoying an afternoon with the surrogate grandparents they'd found in their elderly neighbors. For a few hours at least, they could escape the growing storm of attention. Later that evening, after Zoe had gone to bed, Thomas sat in the dimly lit living room with his laptop. He'd seen 27 missed calls on his phone, most from unknown numbers. His email inbox was flooded with interview requests, messages of support, and even a few hateful comments from people who had somehow found his work address. A new email appeared from Jennifer Choi with the subject line, "Community Response Update." He opened it to find a detailed outline for the Family Diversity Day event, along with a note, "No pressure to participate, but if you're interested in any capacity, we'd welcome your input." Thomas stared at the email for a long time. Part of him wanted to pack up and move away, to protect Zoe from the spotlight and find somewhere they could start fresh again. But another part recognized that running away wouldn't solve the underlying issue. This wasn't just about one woman in one park on one Saturday. It was about the world Zoe would grow up in, and the assumptions she would face again and again. He began to type a reply to Jennifer, carefully considering each word. By the time he finished, a plan had taken shape, not just for the event, but for how he would handle the situation moving forward. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wasn't what he had expected when they moved to Oakwood Heights. But perhaps, just perhaps, this painful incident could become something meaningful, not just for their family, but for others who would come after them. As he hit send on the email, Thomas felt something he hadn't expected, a sense of purpose rising from the ashes of yesterday's humiliation. Whatever came next, he and Zoe would face it together. The week following the park incident passed in a blur for Thomas. Each morning he would steel himself before taking Zoe to school, worried about what she might face. But Principal Winters had been true to her word. The school had become a protective bubble for both of them. Teachers greeted them warmly, and other parents made special efforts to chat with Thomas during drop-off, their friendly gestures saying what words couldn't. "We see you. You belong here." At work, Thomas's team had rallied around him as well. His boss had called him into his office on Monday, not to discuss the viral video that everyone had seen, but to simply ask, "What do you need from us right now?" It was that straightforward question, asked with genuine concern, that had brought Thomas closest to tears all week. By Thursday, local media interest had finally begun to wane after Thomas's consistent refusals to be interviewed. But online, the story had taken on a life of its own. The hashtag #BarOakwood Dad and Daughter was trending in their region, with thousands of multiracial families sharing their own stories and photos. Jennifer Choi called Thomas every evening with updates about Saturday's Family Diversity Day. What had started as a simple gathering in the park had snowballed into a full-fledged community event. Local businesses had donated food and supplies. Musicians had volunteered to perform. Several organizations focused on diversity and inclusion had asked to set up information booths. "It's getting bigger than we anticipated," Jennifer admitted during Thursday's call. "Are you still comfortable with this? We can scale it back if you'd prefer." Thomas glanced across the living room where Zoe was building an elaborate fort out of couch cushions, happily oblivious to the adult conversation. "No, I think it's important," he replied. "But I've been thinking about Bethany." "The woman who confronted you?" Jennifer sounded surprised. "What about her?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "I'm concerned that this event might feel like a public shaming. That wasn't my intent when I agreed to help." The line went quiet for a moment before Jennifer responded. "That's remarkably compassionate of you, Thomas. To be honest, many in the community are pretty angry with her." "I understand that. I was angry too, still am in some ways. But turning this into an us versus her situation won't help anyone learn or grow, especially not Bethany." After hanging up, Thomas sat quietly processing his own words. His perspective on Bethany had evolved over the days since the incident. While he couldn't excuse her behavior, he'd begun to see it as a symptom of deeper issues, assumptions and biases that ran through society like hidden fault lines, mostly invisible until they suddenly weren't. Friday evening brought another surprise. Thomas was helping Zoe with her bath when the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, he was stunned to see Officer Reynolds standing on his porch, out of uniform in jeans and a polo shirt. "Mr. Webb." The officer greeted him with a respectful nod when Thomas opened the door. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to speak with you personally, not as a police officer, but as a member of this community." Thomas hesitated, then gestured for him to come in. "Zoe's just finishing her bath. Can I offer you some coffee?" "No, thank you. I won't stay long." Officer Reynolds seemed uncomfortable, choosing his words with care. "I wanted to apologize again for what happened at the park. I've been an officer in Oakwood for 15 years, and I've always prided myself on treating everyone fairly. But looking back, I realize I could have handled the situation better." Thomas leaned against the kitchen counter, studying the officer. "How so?" "I should have recognized what was happening immediately and shut it down. Instead, I went through the motions of procedure, asking for your ID when the real issue was clear." Reynolds met Thomas's gaze directly. "The truth is, I've been doing some soul-searching this week. I wouldn't have stopped to question you if Bethany hadn't complained. And she wouldn't have complained if I were white," Thomas finished quietly. Reynolds nodded. "I'm attending the event tomorrow. Not in uniform, just as David Reynolds, community member who wants to do better. I've also requested that our department participate in additional training on implicit bias." After the officer left, Thomas went upstairs to find Zoe already in her pajamas, attempting to brush her own hair with limited success. "Who was at the door?" she asked as Thomas gently took the brush and began working through her damp curls. "Remember the police officer from the park? He came to say sorry about what happened." Zoe considered this while Thomas carefully untangled a knot. "Did you forgive him?" The question, so simple yet so profound, made Thomas pause. "I think I did," he said after a moment. "He's trying to learn and do better. Like when I couldn't tie my shoes but kept practicing until I learned." Thomas smiled, amazed at how children could distill complex situations down to their essence. "Something like that, sunshine. Learning is important even for grown-ups. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm. Perfect weather for an outdoor event. Thomas helped Zoe pick out a special outfit. Her favorite purple dress with yellow butterflies and the light-up sneakers she insisted on wearing everywhere. "Are lots of people going to be at the park today?" she asked as Thomas braided her hair. "Yes, quite a few. Is that okay with you?" Zoe nodded confidently. "Mrs. Choi said there will be face painting and a bouncy castle. And ice cream." "That's right. But you know, the day is also about something important. Showing that all different kinds of families belong in our community." As they approached Westside Park, Thomas felt a flutter of nervousness. The entrance was decorated with colorful banners reading Oakwood Family Diversity Day and All Families Welcome Here. Even from a distance, he could see the park was already filled with people, far more than he had anticipated. Jennifer spotted them immediately and hurried over. "You came. I wasn't sure if you would." "We wouldn't miss it," Thomas replied, surprised to find he truly meant it. The park had been transformed. Food trucks lined one side, while the main area featured information booths, activity stations for children, and a small stage where a band was setting up. Families of all configurations moved through the space. Multiracial couples with children, same-sex parents, single parents, grandparents raising grandchildren, adoptive families, blended families, and every other variation imaginable. "Daddy, look." Zoe pointed excitedly to where her friend Jade was waving from the face painting line. "Can I go?" "Of course. I'll be right behind you." As Zoe ran ahead, Principal Winters approached Thomas. "This turnout is remarkable," she said, surveying the crowd. "I think half the school is here." Thomas nodded, still taking it all in. "I never expected anything like this." "Neither did I," a voice said behind them. Thomas turned to find Bethany Richards standing there looking profoundly uncomfortable. His surprise must have shown on his face because she quickly added, "I can leave if you want me to." Thomas and Principal Winters exchanged glances. "No," Thomas said after a moment. "I think it's good that you're here." Bethany twisted her hands nervously. "I didn't know. I didn't expect to be invited after what I did." "Jennifer called me yesterday," Thomas explained. "She said you had reached out to her, wanting to apologize but afraid of intruding." "We agreed you should be included. Why?" Bethany asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "Most people would want nothing to do with me." Thomas considered his answer carefully. "Because excluding you would defeat the purpose of today. This isn't about shame or blame. It's about learning and growing together as a community." Principal Winters nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Now, if you'll both excuse me, I need to help set up the education booth." Left alone with Bethany, Thomas found himself at a loss for words. The woman who had caused such pain for his family now stood before him, her expression a complex mixture of shame and uncertainty. "I've been taking a diversity awareness course," Bethany said suddenly. "Online. It's not much, but it's a start. And her voice faltered. "I truly am sorry for what I put you and your daughter through." Thomas looked across the park to where Zoe was now sporting a butterfly face painting, giggling with her friends. "That's her mother in her smile," he said softly. "Every time she laughs, I see Allison." Bethany followed his gaze. "She's a beautiful child." "She is. And she's also resilient and wise beyond her years. Last night she told me today was about teaching people, not punishing them. Sometimes I think she understands more than most adults." For the first time, Bethany smiled, a small tentative smile, but genuine. "Smart girl. I could learn a lot from her." Throughout the afternoon, Thomas watched as the event unfolded in ways he couldn't have imagined. On the small stage, families shared their stories. Children played together, oblivious to the differences that adults so often fixated on. At the education booth, volunteers guided visitors through interactive displays about bias and inclusion. The local news had sent a camera crew, but instead of focusing on the park incident, they were interviewing families about what community meant to them. Thomas had even agreed to a brief statement with Zoe proudly standing by his side. "What began as a painful experience has become something beautiful," he told the reporter. "This is the true face of Oakwood. People coming together to learn from each other and grow stronger as a community." As the afternoon sun began to lower, Thomas sat on a bench watching Zoe play tag with a group of children from her school. Jennifer joined him, looking tired but happy. "We counted over 500 people today," she said, "and the mayor has asked about making this an annual event." Thomas nodded, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. From one terrible moment to this, it's hard to believe. That's how change happens sometimes, Jennifer replied. Not gradually, but in sudden shifts when something forces us to see what was there all along. Across the park, Thomas noticed Bethany helping clean up one of the activity stations, working alongside other volunteers. She caught his eye and gave a small, respectful nod. Thomas returned the gesture, knowing that while forgiveness was a journey, today had been an important step for all of them. As the event wound down, Thomas gathered a sleepy Zoe into his arms. Her butterfly face paint was smudged and her light-up sneakers were dirty from a day of play, but her smile was as bright as ever. "Did we make a difference today, Daddy?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. Thomas looked around at the park, the same place where, just 1 week ago, they had faced such ugliness. Today it had been filled with connection, understanding, and hope. "Yes, sunshine," he whispered into her hair. "I think we really did." 3 months had passed since the Family Diversity Day at Westside Park. The height of summer had given way to early autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the rhythm of a new school year. Zoe, now proudly in 2nd grade, had decorated her backpack with keychains and pins, including a small rainbow that read, "All families welcome here," a souvenir from that memorable day in the park. Thomas stood at the kitchen counter, packing Zoe's lunch while she finished her breakfast. So much had changed in their lives since that Saturday in the park. Yet their morning routine remained a constant. Thomas making peanut butter sandwiches cut into dinosaur shapes, Zoe insisting on arranging her own apple slices and carrot sticks in the lunchbox compartments. "Daddy, can I bring extra cookies today?" Ms. Patel said we're having a special guest in class. Thomas smiled. "Sure, sunshine. Any idea who the special guest is?" Zoe shrugged, her mouth full of cereal. Ms. Patel said it's a surprise, but it's for our Community Helpers project. As Thomas added extra cookies to the lunch container, he reflected on how Zoe had blossomed these past months. The incident at the park had affected her, certainly, but not in the ways he had feared. Rather than becoming fearful or withdrawn, she had developed an even stronger sense of justice and inclusion. Just last week, she had stood up for a new student who was being teased about his accent, telling her classmates, "Being different isn't wrong. It's just different." The drive to school was filled with Zoe's chatter about her latest art project. Thomas listened, asking questions at all the right moments while mentally reviewing his own day ahead. He had a presentation to finish for work, and afterward, a meeting that both excited and nervous him. "Have a great day, sunshine," he said, bending down for their goodbye hug at the school entrance. "Remember, Aunt Keisha is picking you up today for your dentist appointment." "I know. Daddy, you told me 3 times already," Zoe said with the exaggerated patience of a child explaining things to a forgetful adult. She hugged him tightly and whispered, "Good luck with your big meeting." Thomas watched her skip into the building, her backpack bouncing with each step. Her resilience amazed him daily. He checked his watch, just enough time to stop for coffee before heading to the office. At the local coffee shop, the barista greeted him by name. "Morning, Thomas. The usual?" "Yes, thanks, Aiden." It was a small thing being recognized having a usual order, but these small connections had become more meaningful to Thomas over the past months. They represented belonging, being part of the fabric of a community. His phone pinged with a text from Jennifer Choi. "Committee room booked for 4 p.m., everyone confirmed. Bringing cookies from that bakery you like. No pressure, but your input on the education materials would be invaluable." Thomas smiled as he texted back, "I'll be there. And I've prepared a few thoughts on the materials." The Family Diversity Committee had formed in the weeks following the park event. What had started as a response to one incident had evolved into an ongoing initiative, working with the school district and community organizations to develop resources and programs promoting inclusion. Thomas had initially hesitated to join, worried about the time commitment and continued public attention. But Zoe had surprised him once again. "You should do it, Daddy," she'd said when he mentioned the invitation. "You always tell me to use my voice when something's important." How could he argue with that logic? So he had agreed to participate, setting firm boundaries about his involvement and Zoe's privacy. The committee had respected these boundaries completely, allowing Thomas to contribute meaningfully while protecting his family life. At work, Thomas's day passed in a blur of meetings and code reviews. His team was launching a new software platform next week, and the final preparations kept everyone busy. His boss stopped by his desk just before lunch. "How's the presentation coming along?" "Nearly finished," Thomas replied. "Just adding the test results from yesterday." His boss nodded approvingly. "The client's impressed with what they've seen so far. They specifically mentioned your work on the user interface." He paused. "By the way, the diversity training program you suggested to HR is being implemented company-wide next month." They were quite taken with the approach. Thomas hadn't expected this news. After the park incident, he had cautiously shared some thoughts with the HR director about improving the company's existing diversity initiatives. He hadn't imagined they would implement his suggestions so quickly. That's great to hear," he managed. "You've made quite an impact around here, Thomas. Not just with your technical skills." His boss gave him a knowing nod before moving on to the next desk. By late afternoon, Thomas had wrapped up his work tasks and headed to the school district office for the committee meeting. As he pulled into the parking lot, he spotted a familiar figure walking toward the entrance, Bethany Richards. Their paths had crossed several times since the family diversity day. Each encounter had been civil, increasingly comfortable though never quite easy. Bethany had immersed herself in learning, taking courses on diversity and inclusion, volunteering at community events. Her efforts seemed genuine, not performed for approval or absolution. Thomas caught up to her at the door. "Bethany, good to see you." She turned, a brief flash of surprise crossing her face before she smiled. "Thomas, are you here for the committee meeting too?" "Yes. Jennifer asked me to review some of the education materials they're developing for schools." They walked into the building together, their conversation flowing more naturally than either might have expected 3 months ago. "I've been working with the elementary school library," Bethany shared as they rode the elevator, helping them expand their collection of books that feature diverse families. "The librarian found some wonderful titles," Thomas nodded. "Zoe brought one home last week about a girl with 2 dads. She loved it." The meeting room was already half full when they arrived. Jennifer greeted them warmly, introducing Thomas to several people he hadn't met before, including a curriculum specialist from the school district and a professor from the local university who specialized in early childhood education. "Before we begin," Jennifer said once everyone was seated, "I want to thank you all for your commitment to this work. What started as a response to an unfortunate incident has grown into something truly meaningful for our community." For the next hour, the committee discussed plans for the coming school year, workshop series for parents, training for teachers, age-appropriate activities for students. Thomas contributed his thoughts on the education materials, drawing from his own experiences and from conversations with other parents of multiracial children. What struck him most was how Bethany participated, thoughtfully, humbly, offering insights from her own learning journey without centering herself in the narrative. There was no trace of the defensive woman from the park. In her place was someone actively working to unlearn biases and help others do the same. After the eating, as people gathered their materials and broke into smaller conversations, Bethany approached Thomas. "I have something for Zoe," she said, pulling a book from her bag. "It just came into the library this week. It's about a father and daughter who don't look alike but share the same heart." She hesitated. "If you'd rather not—" "No, that's very thoughtful," Thomas said, taking the book. "She'll love it." "Thank you." Bethany seemed to gather her courage. "There's something else I've been wanting to tell you. I've accepted a position with the Community Relations Department. I'll be coordinating outreach programs focused on building connections between different neighborhoods and demographics in Oakwood." Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's a big change from real estate." "It is," she agreed. "But after everything that's happened, I realized I wanted to be part of the solution, not the problem. This felt like the right way to use my organizational skills for something meaningful." As they walked out to the parking lot together, the setting sun cast long shadows across the pavement. Thomas thought about the journey they had all taken over these past months. Not just him and Zoe, not just Bethany, but the entire community. "Do you ever wonder," he asked quietly, "what would have happened if that day at the park had gone differently? If no one had recorded it, or if I had just taken Zoe and left without standing my ground?" Bethany considered this. "I think about it often," she admitted. I was so certain I was protecting children. I never stopped to question why I saw danger in a situation that was completely innocent. She shook her head. The truth is, without that confrontation and everything that followed, I might still be living with those biases, never examining them or understanding the harm they cause. They reached Thomas's car first. He unlocked it, then turned to Bethany. Zoe asked me recently if I had forgiven you. Children have a way of asking the hardest questions, don't they? What did you tell her? Bethany asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I told her that forgiveness isn't just a single moment. It's a process that happens over time. Thomas met her gaze steadily, and I told her that watching someone learn and grow from their mistakes makes that process easier. Bethany nodded, understanding the weight of his words. Thank you for that. It means more than I can say. On the drive home, Thomas called Keisha to check on Zoe. His sister-in-law assured him that the dentist appointment had gone perfectly and that Zoe was currently helping make dinner at her house. She's been telling me all about this mystery guest in her classroom today, Keisha said. Apparently it was a police officer. Not just any officer, but the one from the park that day. Officer Reynolds? He talked to the kids about community safety and treating everyone with respect. Thomas felt a wave of emotion as he absorbed this information. The interconnected threads of healing and growth extended further than he had realized. When he arrived at Keisha's house, Zoe ran to greet him, her smile revealing a slightly gap-toothed grin where she'd recently lost a baby tooth. Daddy, Officer David came to our class today. He remembered me and he showed us his police car, and he talked about how police officers sometimes make mistakes, but they try to learn from them. That sounds like a great lesson, Thomas said, hugging her close. Later that evening, as he tucked Zoe into bed, Thomas showed her the book Bethany had given him to pass along. Mrs. Richards from the park gave this to you? Zoe asked, examining the colorful cover with interest. Yes. She works at the library now sometimes, and she thought you might like it. Zoe traced the illustration of a father and daughter holding hands. She's trying to be a better person, isn't she, Daddy? Yes, Sunshine, I think she is. That's good, Zoe said with the simple certainty of a child. People should always try to be better. As Thomas turned out the light and closed Zoe's door, he reflected on the remarkable journey their family had taken. A single moment of prejudice in a park had rippled outward, touching countless lives and catalyzing real change. Not everything was perfect. There would always be more work to do, more growth needed, more understanding to be built. But tonight, in the quiet of their home, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. The transformation that had taken place, in Bethany, in the community, and yes, even in himself, was the kind that couldn't be undone. And in that transformation lay hope for the world Zoe would grow up in, a world that just maybe would see her for who she truly was. Not a child who didn't match her father, but a bright, compassionate human being worthy of love and belonging. And that, Thomas thought as he settled onto the couch with a book of his own, was what had shocked everyone most of all. Not the incident itself, but how a community had come together to create something beautiful from something painful, proving that transformation was possible when people opened their hearts to learning and growth.